Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight's story is one of the darkest family mysteries ever recorded. A curse whispered about for more than a century. It follows the Dellinger bloodline, a family where every single child was said to be born already doomed. Not sick, not weak doomed. Some called it punishment. Others called it a curse, and a few believed it was something far more ancient haunting their lineage. Before we dive into this chilling tale, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And make sure to hit that subscribe button, because every story here comes from deep research and hours of digging to bring you the truth buried beneath forgotten history. The first recorded Dellinger child arrived on a cold night, when the moon hid behind a thick layer of dark clouds, and the air inside the small, wooden house felt strangely heavy, as if something unseen had settled over the room. As the mother cried out in labor, the midwife felt a slow, rising dread building in her chest, even though she had delivered children her entire life without fear. When the baby finally slipped into her hands, the room grew unnaturally still, and the air seemed to tighten around them. The newborn did not cry or move, and its skin carried a faint, darkened birthmark that wrapped around the left side of the chest, like the imprint of a hand pressed there before the child ever took its first breath. The midwife stared at the mark with a fear she could not explain, because it looked too deliberate, too shaped, too intentional to be natural. The mother sensed something was wrong, and her voice shook when she asked to see her child. The moment the baby was placed in her arms, the wind outside rose sharply, as if the world itself reacted to the birth, and the quiet inside the room grew so deep that every person there felt their heartbeat pounding louder than anything else. From that night on, the family believed this child had brought something with it, something that did not belong to the living, and the mark on its chest became the first sign of the curse that would follow every Dellinger child after. Not long after the first Dellinger child was born, the unexplained deaths began, and they arrived in ways that felt too precise and too connected to be accidents. The very night the baby was brought home, the family dog was found lifeless beside the front steps, as if it had simply collapsed without sound or struggle. And the midwife who had delivered the child fell ill the next morning with a fever that rose faster than any doctor had ever seen. Within 3 days she was gone, and her final moments were marked by terrified whispers about the mark on the newborn's chest, as though the image of it had carved itself into her mind. The baby's father grew pale and restless after the funeral, saying he often felt watched inside his own home, and his health began fading despite having been strong and hearty all his life. Soon after, he collapsed in the field without warning and never woke again, and the town started to whisper that the deaths followed the child like a shadow that could not be separated from its source. Each person who entered the Dellinger home spoke of a chill that clung to their skin long after they stepped outside, and those who stayed too long seemed to suffer strange sudden misfortunes of their own. As more unexplained deaths spread outward from the house in a widening circle, the townspeople began to fear that the baby was carrying something dark, something old, something that had already chosen who would be taken next, and no one could understand why every loss seemed to trace back to the moment the child drew its first breath. The Dellinger family grew desperate as the pattern of deaths continued, and their attempts to break the curse became more frantic with each passing week, because they could no longer deny that something dark followed every breath their newborn took. The mother, who had once been proud and strong, now lived in constant fear, and she sought out anyone who might offer even the faintest hope of protection, whether through prayer or ritual or remedies whispered about in secret. She invited traveling healers into the home and begged them to look at the child, yet each one left quickly, their eyes wide with quiet terror and their words trembling with warnings she did not fully understand. The family burned herbs through the night, hoping the smoke might push back whatever presence lingered, but the air only grew heavier, as if swallowing the scent before it could rise. They covered mirrors, they nailed sprigs of dried plants around the doors, they even moved the crib from room to room, believing the curse might be tied to a place rather than the child itself. But the strange cold that clung to the house followed them everywhere. The mother finally turned to the old stories her own grandmother once whispered about, bloodline curses and unbroken vows, and she read them with shaking hands, searching for a clue that might explain why a baby could carry such doom. Nothing helped, every attempt failed, and with each new death in the community, people began to avoid the family entirely, leaving them isolated in a house that felt more like a trap than a home. The Dellingers realized that whatever had marked their child had roots far deeper and far more ancient than anything they understood, and no matter what they tried, the shadow remained tied to the infant as tightly as a heartbeat. The mysterious midwife who delivered every Dellinger child became a figure of fear and fascination in the town, because people noticed that she was always present when a new heir was born, no matter the hour or the weather, and no matter how far she had to travel. She lived alone on the edge of the woods in a small cabin that many avoided, since strange lights were said to glow from its windows at night, and soft chanting could sometimes be heard drifting through the trees. Although she rarely spoke about her past, some whispered that she came from a family known for old rituals and forgotten practices passed down through generations, and that she carried knowledge not meant for ordinary people. Whenever a Dellinger birth approached, she arrived without being called, her eyes distant and unreadable, as if she sensed the labor long before anyone told her. During each delivery she worked in an eerie stillness, never flinching even as storms raged outside or as mothers screamed in fear. People who watched her claimed she often stared at the newborns with an expression that was not affection or concern, but recognition, almost as if she had seen those children before in some form that had nothing to do with flesh or blood. She touched each marked chest with a trembling hand, and her lips moved in silent words no one could understand. After every birth, she would leave abruptly, walking back into the woods, without accepting payment, and without looking back at the home where the curse had just taken root again. Some believed she was the guardian of the Dellinger line, others believed she was the cause of its suffering, and a few insisted that she was bound to the family by an ancient oath that could never be broken. Whatever the truth was, her presence at each birth became a warning, a sign that another child was entering the world already claimed by something unseen and unstoppable. Every Dellinger newborn carried strange physical traits that no doctor or neighbor could explain, and these features appeared so consistently that people began to believe the children were not simply born but marked before they ever entered the world. Each infant arrived with skin that felt unusually cold to the touch, as if their bodies held on to the chill of some distant place where warmth did not exist, and their eyes always opened far earlier than they should, revealing a deep, almost ancient awareness that made grown adults step back in fear. Their heartbeats were faint, but steady, yet at times the rhythm shifted into a strange, uneven pattern that made listening to it feel unsettling, as if something else beat alongside it. The birthmark that wrapped around the chest like a hand was only one part of the mystery, because some children had a thin line of darker skin that trailed up their necks like the shadow of something that once gripped them, and others were born with a small patch of hair already grown at the crown of the head, a trait the family had never possessed in any previous generation. When the newborns first breathed, the air around them grew dense and still, like the walls themselves were listening, and sometimes low, soft sounds drifted from their cradles at night. Sounds not quite human and not quite animal, but something in between, something that made the mothers weep and the fathers walk away, unable to stay in the same room. No matter how different the children appeared, one thing remained the same in every birth. Their bodies seemed touched by a force that did not belong to the living world, and the traits they carried felt less like defects and more like signatures left by an unseen hand that claimed them long before they opened their eyes. The night the entire town turned against the Dellingers began with a quiet that felt wrong in every direction, because no dogs barked, no insects hummed, and not a single lantern glowed along the road, as if every home sensed something approaching long before it happened. For weeks, people had whispered about the rising number of deaths that seemed to circle the Dellinger property like a tightening noose, and fear kept spreading until it felt like a thick fog that no one could see through. When another neighbor collapsed suddenly on his doorstep, his eyes wide with terror that no one could explain, the town finally snapped, and their fear twisted into anger so quickly that even those who once pitied the family now looked at their house with pure suspicion. As darkness settled, groups of townsfolk gathered with torches clutched in shaking hands, their faces pale and tense as they murmured about curses and unnatural births, and the shadow that seemed to spill from that house whenever a new child arrived. They marched toward the Dellinger home in a slow, heavy wave, their footsteps thudding through the dirt like a single creature moving with one terrified mind, and the air grew colder with each step, as if something unseen watched them from the trees. The mothers clung to their children, and the men held their torches high though their hands trembled, because none of them truly wanted to see what waited inside that house, yet something stronger than fear pushed them forward. When they reached the property line, a sudden wind swept through the crowd, snuffing out several torches at once, and the people froze as the Dellinger home stood silent and dark like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. A few shouted for the family to come out, but no answer came, only the eerie sense that the walls were holding back a presence that listened to every word. Some wanted to burn the place down, some wanted to force the family out, and some whispered that they should never have come because no mortal hand could stand against whatever lived in that house. In that moment the crowd understood something too late. The curse was not the Dellingers. The curse was what surrounded them, and by stepping onto that land the town had crossed into a darkness that had been waiting patiently for anyone foolish enough to approach. The forbidden diary was discovered years later, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the Dellinger house. Its leather cover cracked and worn, as if it had been pressed under weight for decades, and the pages inside smelled of old smoke and damp earth. Whoever wrote it had poured every fear, every sorrow, and every secret into the thin, fragile sheets with a trembling hand, and the words inside revealed knowledge the family had been taught to hide from the world. The diary spoke of an ancient curse placed on the bloodline long before anyone could remember. A child was doomed from birth, marked by a shadow that followed each generation like a silent predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. It described rituals performed in secret, the exact words to speak, and the strange symbols to draw to try to protect a child. Yet, even as instructions were recorded, the author admitted failure and despair, that nothing could stop the inevitable. There were mentions of figures who came in the night, people who watched the family silently, and of omens that appeared in the skies before each death, the moon turning red, or the wind rising unnaturally, or the trees whispering in ways no ordinary human could hear. The diary also included sketches of the birthmarks and unusual physical traits that appeared on every child, as if the author tried to make sense of a pattern that had no explanation in the natural world. Anyone who found the diary described a chill that clung to their bones as they read the words, a sense that the curse was still alive and still waiting, and some claimed the pages whispered to them softly in the dead of night, hinting at secrets no one should ever uncover. It became clear that the diary was both a warning and a confession, a record of generations lost, and a grim map of the doom that followed the Dellinger line. Like a relentless shadow that no prayer, no ritual, and no human effort could ever banish. The child who survived longer than any other was a small, fragile boy who seemed to carry a different kind of weight than his siblings, yet even he bore the unmistakable signs of the family curse from the moment he opened his eyes. Unlike the others, his birth was quieter, though the air still grew heavy and still in the room, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, and he had the same faint birthmark wrapping around his chest, the same unnatural cold to his skin, and the same eerie awareness in his gaze that unnerved everyone who looked at him. From the very beginning, the family watched him constantly, afraid that any moment the curse would claim him like it had the others, and neighbors who had once pitied them now avoided the house entirely because the shadow that clung to the boy seemed palpable to anyone who came near. As he grew, he exhibited strange resilience and strength, yet small accidents and minor illnesses seemed drawn toward him in ways that terrified the mother and confused the doctors who examined him. Sometimes the boy would wake in the middle of the night, his eyes wide and staring at empty corners, as if he saw people no one else could see, and whispers of names not known to the family escaped his lips in a voice too old for someone so young. Despite all of this, he survived longer than anyone could have imagined, and for a brief period the family dared to hope that perhaps the curse had loosened its grip, or that the boy was somehow different, somehow protected. Yet even in this fragile window of relief, the sense of inevitable doom never left the house. The air remained cold and heavy, and the shadows seemed to linger longer near his crib than anywhere else. Every person who came to see him felt the same quiet fear, the same knowing that this child was different, but that difference did not guarantee safety, only a temporary reprieve from a darkness that had ruled the family for generations. The ritual rumored to save the final heir was a desperate measure whispered about in secrecy among the oldest members of the Dellinger family, who had lived long enough to witness the curse claim child after child, and the instructions were carefully guarded like a fragile treasure that no outsider could see or touch. According to the stories, it had to be performed on a night when the moon was hidden and the air was still, as if the world itself were holding its breath, and it required precise movements and words spoken aloud in a voice that did not tremble or falter. The family had to draw specific symbols on the floor with chalk and salt and arrange small objects representing each child who had been lost in a circle around the baby, while keeping their own fear from touching the ritual, or it would fail. Every step demanded absolute focus and unwavering belief, because even the smallest doubt was said to call the darkness closer rather than pushing it away, and the heir had to remain in the center of the circle without crying or moving for the entire duration, as if the child were aware of the danger, even without knowing what it was. Those who attempted the ritual described a strange stillness that fell over the house and a pressure on their chests, as if something unseen was testing their resolve, and the candles that lined the room flickered wildly, though no wind entered. Some claimed they heard faint whispers in the corners of the room, voices not belonging to any living person warning them to stop, or the curse would take everything at once, while others felt cold fingers brush their skin, though no one was near. Despite following every instruction to the letter, many attempts ended in failure, with the child falling ill or strange events occurring in the house that convinced the family the curse would never be broken, and yet the hope persisted that if every precaution was observed, if every motion and every word was exact, the ritual might succeed, and for one brief moment the darkness might be held at bay, allowing the final heir a chance at life free from the relentless shadow that had haunted their line for generations. The disappearance of the last remaining Dellinger child was sudden and complete, leaving the family shattered, and the town in fearful speculation, because one night the child simply vanished from the cradle, without a sound, without a trace, and without any signs of forced entry or escape. The mother woke in the early hours to check on the baby and found the room empty, the blankets neatly folded, and the small birthmark that had haunted every generation missing from sight, along with the child who should have been sleeping peacefully. Every search yielded nothing, no footprints, no sounds, no hints of where the child had gone, and the family called neighbors and town officials, yet no one could explain how a child could disappear so completely from a home that had always been watched over so carefully. Some claimed to see glimpses of the boy in the shadows along the edge of the woods where the moonlight struggled to reach, as if he were moving just beyond their sight, and others swore they heard his faint cry echoing across the hills at night, a sound that brought both fear and sorrow. The family became reclusive, the father wandering the land in silent despair, the mother sitting for hours, staring at empty cradles and windows, and whispering prayers into the dark air that seemed to swallow her voice. Rumors spread quickly in the surrounding towns that the curse had claimed the final heir, and that the child had been taken by the same unseen force that had haunted the Dellinger line for generations, a force no one could fight or understand. Some believed the child still lived in some hidden dimension or in a place touched by the supernatural, carrying the burden of the curse in secret, while others insisted the disappearance marked the true end of the family line, with nothing left to inherit or continue. The house itself remained cold and silent, the walls heavy with the memory of loss, and the shadow of the missing child lingered in every room, like a reminder that the Dellinger Curse was more than a family legend. It was an enduring force that could never be escaped, no matter how careful or desperate anyone became. The legacy of fear the Dellinger family left behind stretched far beyond the walls of their crumbling house, and long after the last child disappeared, the stories of their cursed line haunted the surrounding towns and countryside. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the deaths that had followed each birth, the strange marks on the children, the chilling cries that sometimes echoed through the night, and the unshakable presence of something unseen that clung to the family like a shadow that could not be dispersed. Families warned their children never to wander near the old property, and travelers passing through the area sometimes reported glimpses of figures in windows or the faint sound of crying carried on the wind that made them quicken their pace. Scholars and local historians who tried to document the Dellinger story often found missing pages in records or conflicting accounts that suggested someone or something was determined to keep the truth buried and the tale alive only in whispers and warnings. The house itself decayed, but the fear remained. The walls and floors still seemed to exude a cold that could be felt from outside, and even animals avoided the land as if they sensed the weight of what had happened there. The legend became a part of the local culture, a cautionary tale about what it meant to be born into a line that carried more than blood, what it meant to be marked before life had even begun, and the sense that the past could reach out and touch the present lingered in every retelling. To this day, those who speak of the Dellingers do so with reverence and dread, knowing that the curse that plagued the family may not have ended with the disappearance of the final heir, and that the echoes of doom can travel through time, leaving fear as the most enduring inheritance of all.